when you move from a technical role into a corporate CEO role, for example, there really isn't an instruction manual to say, this is what you need to do. These are the relationships you need to build. Talk to these 3 key broking firms to organise access to capital, all those sorts of things. And so it can be very daunting, really, and therefore there's either an assumption that people have past experience to do that, or else they'll have to lean on their existing relationships to find out how to do that.
Today I'm speaking with Andrew Paterson. Andrew is a geologist and the CEO of Great Boulder Resources based out of Perth, Australia. Their spectacular visible gold and recent exploration drill holes at Mulga Bill got a lot of attention, and I've been following their progress for some time now. But I didn't connect with Andrew because of the great exploration results. I picked up that Andrew recently floated the idea of a CEO network and is calling on better collaboration and support between CEOs, particularly for junior exploration companies. Now, as you know from previous conversations I've had on this channel, I quite like and support this idea about collaboration rather than competition, and I wanted to know more about it. So Andrew runs me through what he's planning here, the reasons behind it, when the first meeting will be, what topics will be discussed, and who he expects to see there. It's always great to connect with people who give up their free time to try and make this industry a better place, and I certainly think this CEO network idea should get some more airtime. I hope there's something interesting for you in this conversation. Let's get into it. Nice to meet you, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, and likewise, and yeah, thank you for suggesting it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and just to get right into it, I read something that you said on LinkedIn, I think, and it really hit home with me because that's exactly what we should be doing more of. I mean, collaboration is this topic that I really care deeply about, and I was reading through this post and I was like, wow, what a great initiative! So immediately thought we should connect and chat because. You might not have seen some of the other chats, but I was actually talking to a few CEOs of junior companies and really picking their mind on what it means to run a small junior, right, in 2023, and perhaps also for those who might not have 40 years of experience doing so. So I found it actually really quite exciting to talk to these people, and then I saw your post and I thought, what a great segue into what you're trying to set up. So without further ado, maybe for those who don't know you, if you can give us a bit of a background. I mean, you're a geologist, obviously, and I can see the beautiful sign of Great Boulder behind you. So you're an MD of Great Boulder. So give us a bit of a background, what you're doing Great Boulder, and your career and how you sort of got to this point.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm a geologist and started off quite a conventional career path in mining in Western Australia, particularly around Kalgoorlie, Coolgardie, Kambalda. A lot of underground mining experience for the first 10 years of my career, and gravitated into management roles and slowly over that time more into, I suppose, executive positions. And so I arrived in the exploration space quite late in life in that sense. Coming from really a grade control and resource estimation background.
Interesting. Usually it's the other way around, isn't it? A lot of people start in exploration. But what? I mean, sorry to interrupt, but why did you suddenly decide, no, this is more exciting, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it's kind of almost by accident, really. So I'd been in the mining space, right through into being the geology manager at Mount Magnet. Looking after open pit, underground, and exploration teams there, and then moved into a role where I was right back at the sharp end of grassroots exploration, and kind of, and in that sort of role, a very technical focus. And then I realised that there was a lot that I didn't know, so kind of then moved sideways from that role into an iron ore exploration role with Atlas Iron, and learned a lot there. And also working with David Flanagan at the time, I learned a lot about how he operates in the corporate space. And he's one of those gifted individuals who's the same age as I am, but who's probably 10, 15 years ahead of me in terms of understanding, I suppose, the nuances of corporate life. And so watching him succeed in that world was enormously beneficial for me, and it gave me a kind of a view on how I wanted to do things when I ended up in that kind of in a similar position.
Yeah. Well, I'd actually, at some point, if you don't mind, maybe not right now, but to come back to that, because I'd love to understand what that experience is, right? And I chatted about this the other day. What's the special sauce, and what is this corporate experience, right? I mean, where do you learn this if not just by osmosis in the role itself and by hanging around the right people, right? It's not. I mean, I talked to Alan Trench the other day. You might know. I mean, do we need to do an MBA to become an MD of an exploration company? I asked him that point blank, because he runs the school, a school of business in WA, and he said, maybe not. So that's interesting. But now with Great Boulder, so what's the angle? Could you just run us through what Great Boulder does? I mean, obviously, how long have you been with Great Boulder?
Yeah, so I've been here about 3.5 years, going on 4 years. And yeah, interestingly, I was in a role, a technical director role, and spending a lot of time in New Guinea, which I enjoyed. But the physical and logistical challenges of going back and forth from a base in Perth were kind of wearing a bit thin on the home front. So my wife and I agreed it's probably time for me to come back to Western Australia. And I was actually on holiday in Thailand, and I saw on Mining News that the MD of Great Boulder had resigned. And when I got back to Perth, I actually rang him up out of the blue and said, this is kind of unusual, but I would like to apply for your job.
Yeah, that is unusual, but.
And so he said, he was pretty cool. He said, yep, no worries. That was Stefan Murphy. He said, send us your details and I'll pass them through to Greg Hall, the chairman. And I knew of Greg Hall at the time, but I didn't know him personally. So I was, I suppose, a little bit, I guess, daunted by Greg's reputation as being an exploration geo of kind of world renown, and very pleased to find out when I met him he's actually one of the nicest people you could hope to meet. So really landed on my feet there with a company that was I suppose a clean opportunity, in the sense that there weren't any kind of nasty skeletons in the closet or angry shareholders that I had to be wary of. And so that allowed me to kind of put plans in place, things that I'd had in the back of my mind for several years in terms of how I wanted to run the company. And with the support of people like Greg and our exploration manager Dan and the rest of the board, who at that point were mainly geos, so kind of fell into quite a technical group, which has, I suppose, been an enormously beneficial support network for me as someone who's less of a super technical geologist and more kind of a practical entrepreneurial, I suppose, personality. And yeah, on top of all that, one of the part of the secret sauce is luck, really. And
yeah, well, it's timing is probably an element as well, but the luck thing, I'm not. I'll argue that. But I mean, obviously there has to be a timing element to that. But it sounds like, you make your decisions throughout your career, right? I mean, jokes aside, and you make those for the right reasons, and you want to hang out with good people, because that is one way to learn. And I mean, one thing that you just said triggered something. I mean, and I got given this book by one of our geologists the other day, and I can't remember the title exactly, but it's something to do with generalists versus specialists, right? And we're there's obviously plenty of specialists in the geology space or engineering space. But, as MDs running these companies, you need to have a few tricks, right? Obviously, you need to be technically competent to understand what you're looking at, but you're not going to be, a structural guru or a mineral system guru or all of the above. So, and if you have a board and a group around you who has a technical expertise, then and you know who to ring, and I mean, I think you said, at some point you go through that Dunning-Kruger process, and you know what you don't know, and at least you know who to connect with to fill those gaps, right? So if you're well supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one thing that's worked for me is is kind of not being egotistical and being in a group that isn't run by people who are there for the power. So it is a really egalitarian kind of organisation, and so we can ring Scott Halley in Tasmania and say, oh, we've got this new data. What do you think about this? And he'll look at it straight away. And those, I suppose, those relationships just create so much value. Whereas, I suppose, for want of a better word, if you're a dickhead, then people will treat you like one, and you might not necessarily have the same experience.
Well, and that's maybe the angle to sort of the topic that we were hoping to touch on. And I think, there's plenty of dickheads to be found, I'm sure. Maybe I'm one of them, but, there is certainly no shortage of people who are willing to share their knowledge, and I've mentioned it on this channel before. And I find it actually really quite... I don't know, is surprising the right word, but you could literally go to anybody in your LinkedIn network, and I'm sorry to raise that platform probably too often here, but it's such a good example of how well connected we actually really are, and how we support each other, and whether you're a competitor or not. I mean, I'm a service provider, but there's plenty of competitor service providers who are quite willing and able to, help me out if I give them a call, right? And I don't know Scott personally, but plenty of those people who would be. It's all for the science and for the excitement about finding stuff, right? And that sort of binds us. And I think there's plenty of that around. But it's nice to hear that, at least from a corporate perspective, you're not sitting in this, in this corporate facade where everything is about the share price and not about the project and the geology that ultimately underpins it. So that's a great place to be. And I wish everybody, as they get experience in the industry. I mean, I always joke, don't pick the salary, right, or the conditions, pick your boss, right? I mean, you've got to hang out with the good people to be able to advance and learn things. So that really resonates with me. But maybe then, as a segue into this CEO network, right? And for those who don't know, I'll put a quick link in. And I don't think you got anything like a website or something. It's a concept, right? And maybe and I want to give that some light, because I'm interested myself. We started an exploration company as well, so I've got a few other tricks on the books. But it's different than running a service company, right? And who do you connect with to learn if it's not in your immediate network? So setting up this, I think you called it CEO network. Great idea. Do you want to explain what the idea is here?
Yeah, so that's right. The concept, I guess, was kind of a brainwave, if you like, that I thought. When you move from a technical role into a corporate CEO role, for example, there really isn't an instruction manual to say, this is what you need to do. These are the relationships you need to build. Talk to these 3 key broking firms to organise access to capital, all those sorts of things. And so it can be very daunting, really, and therefore there's either an assumption that people have past experience to do that, or else they'll have to lean on their existing relationships to find out how to do that. And because I suppose the gamut of responsibilities of a small cap managing director CEO are very broad. Everything from people and safety and the environment and kind of the whole ESG spectrum, all the way through to making sure that there's enough money in the bank that you can pay your bills and keep the exploration program going. And so I thought, well, now that I've only done this for a few years, I still regard myself as kind of a junior managing director, where the company is in a happy place that we're getting runs on the board and the project's moving forward really nicely. So maybe I could put this into a kind of a network, a collaborative support network, whereby we can sort of talk to each other and bounce these ideas around. And so late last year, I put that sort of concept out on LinkedIn and was really swamped with positive responses. and I said, oh look, I'll get something going early next year, and I'm a bit kind of late in doing so, but now finally getting wheels under it.
Mm-hmm. So you got a location, and what sort of, you got? I saw some of the feedback online, and indeed some companies and people putting their name in the hat as well. Have you got something on the calendar already, or?
Not completely locked in, but it looks like we should get a function up and running in late April. And so one of the issues we're kind of grappling with is sponsorship. So if you've got 25 or 30 or 40 people, you need a venue, and then someone has to pay for that. I don't want to be charging membership fees or anything like that. So we have organised some sponsorship, which is great. That's with a service provider here in West Perth, MEC Mining Consulting. So they're going to support us to get up and running. So yeah, the three core principles of the group are collaboration and support of each other. Secondly, providing encouragement and advice to people who are considering moving up into that sort of a role. And thirdly, and fairly specifically, encouraging more females into the boardroom. So, that I'm aware that kind of sounds sort of warm and fuzzy, and that's deliberate. Like, I think there's plenty of room for those nice concepts to exist in the corporate space.
Look, I don't think it sounds warm and fuzzy at all. I mean, it's just sound governance, right? I mean, you need to have diversity of thinking and diversity in all sorts of aspects around a board table. So it's not warm and fuzzy at all. I think it's people drag it into the woke space too quickly these days is the overcorrection that is very easy to make. But no, I fully support that, and I think it's a great initiative. But I mean, for people listening, then probably again, I'll put a link in there so people know how to contact you. But in terms of topics, then, right? Because you're sitting in the room, and Chatham House rules, I presume, right? Because you all got stories to share about what works and what doesn't work. What are sort of the key things that you either want to share, or for people where you think the value lies? And if I come up with a few ideas, I mean, you just mentioned brokers, right? I mean, we're trying to raise some money at the moment. Yeah, that's tricky, and everybody has their avenues and their stories to share. Would that be at all precluded by some competitive nature, or I mean, this is obviously truly meant to be a collaborative space, but have you ever sensed that sort of competitive nature from other MDs in this space, or is that just not at play?
No, and I guess that's a great example, actually, because everybody has their ideas and their recommendations, but for me, the bottom line is, as a junior company, if you can establish relationships with people that you know and trust in the broking world, and it sounds cynical, but it's more difficult than it sounds, because you rely upon those people greatly for relationships with particularly the retail network, and therefore they can make or break a company. So you need to sort of diversify risk and hopefully have 2 or 3 of those sorts of relationships, people that you can ring up when you need to raise money and say, look, we're kind of getting towards that stage of our evolution that we're going to need to raise more capital soon. But if you trust those people, then it just makes the whole thing 10 times easier. And as I'm sure you're aware, if you need to raise money, you can always raise money in Australia, but it might churn through in the next 3 days, and it'll all come back on the market, and your share price will halve. And so, that's another example, I suppose, of really important relationships for everybody in the industry, and it's certainly not just in the junior space.
Yeah, no, look, those relationships. I mean, I can certainly see value in there, and if not, it's a great place to also share the downs when you drill this great hole that is fantastic and the share price goes down, and we can all probably explain to each other that nobody will ever understand it. But and I mean, it's maybe just a slightly different angle to that, right? And sorry to maybe drift off a little or digress a little bit here, but I'm intrigued by the sort of a personal intrigue, I guess, about the skills needed to perform in that role, because I see those exploration companies not as classic is not the right word, but a company comes with a vision and a purpose and a mission, and you're on the way to somewhere. You've got aspirations, and the aspirations for an exploration company are always the same, right? You have a project, and you're going to develop that project, right? I mean, BHP might have a huge vision to become something warm and fuzzy, to use that word, for the future generations, and so on, and weave some clever wording around that to make that so. But you just mentioned the word entrepreneurial. I like to consider myself as slightly entrepreneurial. But how, and I asked this question of another MD, Chad Peters, who runs Ridgeway in Canada. And he says on the website for the exploration company, we're different. And I was like, interesting. How are you different? And, so what is it that you do better than the other folks out there? And then I'd be interested to see, if you're sitting there all in the same room, you're all trying to get a project somewhere, right? That's what binds you. So I'm finding it really interesting from a strategy perspective, and to convince people, if you're not selling iPhones, what it is that you're actually doing differently. And, us being both geologists, never studying business, that's new to you, probably new to me, and new to other people in the room there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I often say to investors when they ring me, and I say, well, what do you like in the industry? And I say, well, in Australia, the gold sector, as an example, is in a really good space, because there's so many really dynamic junior exploration companies run by smart people who are passionate about what they do. And so in that sense, we're actually not that different. So you raise a good point, because differentiating yourself is quite tough. And, we have a couple of points of difference which have evolved, and one is, our board, and in fact, the whole company is 50-50 male and female, and that's kind of unusual still. And that hasn't been a deliberate strategy. It sort of has in the boardroom, where we wanted some diversity of thought, but I can talk about that later. But in terms of the group, we're still only sort of 12 people of employees, and it's half and half. We didn't set out to achieve that. It just kind of happened. But then the other point of difference is where luck comes in, that I mentioned before, is that we have this project now which has been delivering some kind of bonanza style high grades, and when we're consistently appearing on the top of the charts for the highest grades in Australia on a weekly basis, then people start to notice that. So
yeah, that helps.
Certainly helps.
I saw those posts, and there was plenty of traction you got on that, and rightfully so. There's spectacular stuff.
Yeah, and that was initially luck, in that we identified that project 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, but it didn't kind of stand out, obviously, and say, there's this big super high grade deposit here. We just saw that there was enough to interest us to take that deal and start exploring it. So we've now identified that high grade opportunity, but initially there was a lot of luck involved, and that's part of the game in exploration.
Well, it is, and again, coming back on that point of difference, I mean, one of the things that I was trying to explore in this previous conversation was, look, I mean, exploration, you can do it smartly, and plenty of people use that as a pretty standard point of difference. We've got good geologists, and we apply a good systems, mineral system science, and et cetera, and you can probably come up with a few specific techniques that you might be using that others are not using yet, but essentially we're going through the same process. What I'm sensing a little bit is that there's also a different group of investors positioning themselves into the exploration/mining space. And I haven't really quite found out the best way to phrase this yet, but I'm seeing us in a little bit on a tipping point where you can see how completely under invested our industry is, and as much slack as we've been given by all the environmentalists out there, it's becoming pretty clear to the Teslas and all the other groups in the world that we have to do better, and that we are part of that solution. And I think together with investors getting perhaps a little bit disenfranchised with the Bitcoins of this world, all of these things combining and now coming out of this crisis, I suppose, and the reason I'm jumping around a little bit, because I think there is a good case to make for some of this investment to come out of a non-classic corner, if you like, right? So we're not talking about these standard brokers in West Perth anymore that walk the same streets with the same banks and the same this and that. And I got a little bit of a sniff of that by talking to a couple of the Canadians who are close to the Silicon Valley investors. And the interesting angle for me there, overlapping with what you were setting up, I'd be interested to see how many young folk you get into the door in that CEO network. I'd be really fascinated to see what value they add, because I think we're quite classically conservative as CEOs or MDs of these companies doing this in a particular way. But do we have to do it this way? And can we maybe tap into a completely different angle, whether it's just investment or purpose, right, to actually tell people why we need to do what we do? And it'd be a fantastic platform to drag. I mean, what's his name? I forgot his name. Is it Simon Williams? He's a young CEO as well. I probably got his name wrong, but a 30-something-year-old, and just doing great stuff with some cobalt projects in Australia and in Africa. I'd love to hear his ideas in a setting like that. I mean, have you got any of sort of the younger generation? And I don't know what that means, as I keep saying here, but coming through, or what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I know certainly there are some in the group, and for example, Kath Cutler at Killy Resources, I don't know how old Kath is, but I'm guessing she's kind of in her early 30s, so she's a young dynamo. I know Kath personally, we worked together for a couple of years, so I knew it wouldn't take too long for her to get into a board role. I totally agree. I think the industry as a whole is super conservative, and we don't change often. Even our technology doesn't change much. I think new ideas and new ways of doing things, and whether that be within the industry or how we attract investment, is super powerful. And in fact, I think one thing we can vastly improve on is how we explain what we do to, for example, the retail market, because people do tend to have stereotypical views of the mining industry as being old-fashioned, dirty, run by diesel, polluting, and just generally messing the place up. And that's fair. There's certainly evidence supporting that view, but by and large, what they miss is the benefits of mining and the benefits of all the minerals that we produce. We're pretty bad at selling that story to the broader community.
Yeah, and those people, they understand better how that works, and I think by connecting with a different dynamics in terms of groups, identity, and I think we do a lot better in finding investment as well. People actually support what you're doing in some sort of direct way. So really, again, coming back to that diversity of thought, and I'm sure it's not an accident that those people end up on the board, right? It's never by accident, but it's also not by quota, right? I mean, that's probably the point that you were trying to make. You didn't have a quota of some sort, and I don't particularly support equality of outcome as much as I do equality of opportunity. And I think if the board recognizes that those are the skills required, and you go and look for them instead of just shoulder tapping a mate, I think that's when you're building strong governance, and it sounds like you guys have got the formula quite right. And I think that's what I would want to listen to, those experiences. If I would draw a straw to be able to attend that CEO network in the Mac building at some point, those are great discussions to listen to and to learn from. So yeah, well done. I'm really quite excited. April might over in May, but I think I'm due to visit your office soon anyway. But I'll come and say today. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, we're certainly, I'm personally really excited by the feedback that we've had, and people are really keen. I actually had this idea in the back of my head for most of last year, and eventually a friend of mine said, "Well, are you actually going to do it or not?" And I said, "Oh, well, all right. Do you think it's a good idea?" So here we go.
Have you put up any other? I mean, because usually the people who you say, "Oh, you know, this is I'll go and do this," they also deeply immersed in other activities, be it AIG or AusMM or otherwise. Or are you otherwise involved with those kind of groups, or like for instance, I was thinking about AMEC, right? Because that's exploration companies as well. I mean, would there not be a logical? I mean, they've got like 500 companies. And maybe would it be good to tap into that network or?
Yeah, definitely. I haven't really addressed that. I'm kind of conscious of not duplicating things, for example, that AIG and AusIMM do in terms of mentoring. There's some overlap with women in mining here in Perth, and so I have a relationship with that group. So I think there'll be synergies. And I think like AMEC is another good example because it is more it's exploration end of town. So we're an AMEC member and a big supporter of what they do. So yeah, I think that at some stage, once we get up and running, I think there'd definitely be synergies there as well.
Yeah, but it's not particularly you're not excluding larger companies, or are you I mean, is it just for juniors, or do you think it's a bit of a? How do you want to control that? Is it?
Well, I guess the concept is for people who are at a relatively early stage in their CEO career, whether regardless of how old they may be, and so that tends to restrict, or not restrict, but tends to be more the junior end of town, because you're more experienced managing directors are going to be the ones who get chosen for the bigger companies, but there's certainly no restriction. Anyone can join, and yeah, it has been quite a diverse response. So
yeah, as long as you keep those dirty consultants out, mate. You don't want those.
Yeah. No, we have been tapped up by a few service providers that I've kind of discouraged, but others I'm happy with. So that's good.
Well, look, I mean that's what I mean. It's the same with any conference, right? You're not there to talk to those. Service providers. You're there to connect with investors and perhaps even with others out there. But before you know it, the resources roundups and all those great conferences or the Frio event. I'm sure you guys are there as well. It's hard to keep them out because obviously that's also a good source of funding. But no, it's a fair enough model, and really exciting to hear about it. And good luck with it. If there's anything I can do, but I appreciate. But there's always overlap, right? And I don't think mentoring. I mean, AusMM does a bit of mentoring, but it's really focused on the junior sort of part and not necessarily on the MDs. Although that's an interesting concept, but I don't think there's any conflict there. I think it's a great initiative. So for all those listening, get on board and. Thanks for taking the initiative. Any closing thoughts from your end? Because
no, thank you for the opportunity, and by all means, if you see that link there, get in touch with me. And there's a group page on LinkedIn, or just send me an email, and I'll add you to the list.
Good stuff. All right, thanks so much. And I'll find you in Perth at some point. Maybe grab a beer and talk more because this is a great topic. So thanks so much, man.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Cheers, Andrew.